from New York. No, we are in Laguna Woods, and it's the Laguna Woods Show with your host and moderator, Esther Grossfield. Here's Esther.
Hi, welcome to the Laguna Woods Show, where every guest matters. Today we have a very special guest. He's a lawyer, and his name is Nick DePrisco. Hi, Nick.
How you doing?
So nice to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you are a public defender, right?
Well, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I used to be a public defender, but I do the same work as a public defender now, but only in private practice.
Oh.
Mm.
So why did you become a public defender?
Well, I think way back when, I think even when I was in high school, actually even in elementary school, I always was fascinated with the legal profession, being a lawyer. And I moved to Colorado after graduating college and getting married. And I had the opportunity to participate in a clinic program in Pueblo, Colorado courts and for the summer. And for the first five weeks, I worked in the court system, the clerk's office. And there was like 4 judges in the whole building. So I got to know everybody. At the end of the 5th week, one of the judge's court officers, which here in California is like a bailiff, except they don't wear uniforms, asked me if I could be his court officer for the next 5 weeks because his court officer had a heart attack. So I said, sure. And he said, what you would do is you would just sit in court all day and listen to the cases. And then on the breaks and whatnot, you could come into chambers with me and we'll talk about the cases and the law and whatnot. So I did that for 5 weeks, and it was just a fascinating experience. And it sold me on being a lawyer, but in particular public defender, because the public defenders, when they appeared before the judge, they always made these constitutional arguments. They were always standing up for the civil rights of the individual. And I was very impressed with that because they were always the underdog, right? They were constantly arguing with the judge. They were always arguing with the prosecutors, of course. And so they always seemed to have to take the underdog side, and that kind of intrigued me. So from there, I decided that I would go to law school, become a lawyer, and if I became a lawyer, which I did, I said I would want to work in the public defender's office. And I was fortunate enough to get a job with the San Bernardino County Public Defender. And so I worked for San Bernardino County Public Defender for about 7 years. And then I spent time in the Riverside County Public Defender's office for another 7 years. So for almost half my career, I was a public defender.
And then at one point you became a mayor of Apple Valley. Tell us about it.
Yeah, outside the legal work,
Yes.
I was living in Apple Valley and I was working in the San Bernardino County Public Defender's Office in Victorville, which is adjacent to Apple Valley. And Apple Valley decided to incorporate, and I felt that I'd like to participate in the local government. So I ran for town council of Apple Valley, and I won. And not only did I win, but I won with the most votes. And the tradition in Apple Valley was that the candidate who got the most votes would be appointed mayor by the rest of the council. So because I got the most votes, the rest of the council appointed me Apple Valley's first mayor.
Oh my God, you're going to go down the history as the first
Yes,
mayor of
yeah.
Apple Valley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there was a famous person that used to live there.
Yes.
Roy Rogers.
Yes, Roy and Dale.
Yeah, so-
Roy Rogers and Dale Evans.
Did you know them?
I knew them, yeah. I attended a lot of functions and fundraisers and things like that. And Roy Rogers and Dale Evans were always going to these functions. And I had the opportunity several times to have dinner with them and sit at the same table and have night-long discussions with Roy about horses.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and his acting career, and fascinating man. And even though he was, obviously a big star, he was very down to earth, very easy to talk to.
So did you have a horse there too? near?
Yes, in Apple Valley I did. My wife and I bought an acre of land, and on the acre of land was horse facilities, corrals and tack houses and things like that. So we had a neighbor who was very much into horses, and I said, I'd like to own a horse. So he took me out one day and found a horse for me, and I started, riding the horse and getting into horsemanship and whatnot, and eventually led to where I wound up getting into quarter horse racing and breeding quarter horse racehorses. And at one time I had about 8 horses,
Wow.
which was way too many. But,
Wow.
but we did. And I had horses, most of them ran at Los Alamitos here in Orange County.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I don't have any horses anymore, although the last horse I had, I kept here at Laguna Woods.
Equestrian
Yeah, at the
Center.
Equestrian Center. Yeah, I kept him there.
Like years ago.
Yeah, that was quite a number of years ago. That was before I lived in Laguna Woods.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then at that time, you could hear the planes.
Oh, yeah.
What was that all about?
Well, back then, which was quite a while ago, I guess it was 20 years ago at least,
Yeah.
there was the El Toro Air Base right here where, the Great Park is today. And it was I believe it's a Marine base, and they had fighter jets, and they would fly these fighter jets regularly.
How often?
Because they have to get, these pilots have to get flying time, and what they would do is they would take off, and they would go around in a big circle, and then come down and touch down again, and then go up again, so it count as being out up in the air. And the flight path was directly over Laguna Woods. And so these fighter jets, which I don't know if you ever heard a fighter jet go over, very, very loud. And they were maybe 1,000 feet above the ground when they came over Laguna Woods. And they would do that almost every day. And when they did it probably, I would say, about every 30 seconds to a minute, there was a fighter jet.
Oh my God.
So, although I didn't live here, I was here, with
You
the
could hear it.
horses,
Oh
and it
my
was
God.
very unbearable.
How
And
could people live like that?
I know. Finally, they closed it. They closed El Toro Air Base,
Because
which was necessary, really.
they closed it, and we have a city. The mayor, we have a city here,
Yeah.
the Laguna Woods.
Yeah, Laguna Woods is incorporated.
Yes.
But they had closed that El Toro base.
Before that?
Quite a time before Laguna Woods was incorporated. I think Laguna Woods was incorporated, about 5 years ago?
I don't know.
6 years ago, I
I
think.
don't know exactly.
Something like
Oh,
that.
so this was much
Yeah, and they
before.
closed El Toro probably at least 10, maybe 15 years ago.
15 years
Yeah.
ago.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you did a lot of, not a lot of cases, but you did some murder cases.
Oh, yeah. Well, being a public defender, you handle everything from traffic violations to death penalty cases. And of course, it goes in accordance to your experience. And eventually, I had enough experience where I was handling very serious felony cases, murder cases, rape cases, robbery, everything imaginable. And I also had several death penalty cases as well.
Do they take longer? I mean, to have a death penalty case, does the case go a long time?
Much longer, yeah.
How long was
The
the
preparation. Oh, I would say, from the actual filing of the complaint charging somebody with the death penalty and murder to resolution to where the individual is finally sentenced, if it gets that far, I would say it's probably at least a 2-year
Wow,
proposition. Yeah.
that's long.
It takes quite a while.
That's a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation, both on the DA side and the defense side.
You have to go over the evidence and everything. huh?
Exactly.
You have to go.
There's a lot of legal arguments to be made. Legal issues pop up and they're challenged in court. Because, in death penalty cases, there is, if someone is convicted and sentenced to death in California, there is an automatic appeal to the California Supreme Court. So, as a defense attorney, you realize that. So you try to, cross every T and dot every I legally during the course of the proceedings in the trial to assure that your client has appealable issues. So that takes time. It takes time. You have to work up motions and argue the law to the judge and have special hearings to determine that particular legal issue. And it could decide how the trial is presented. Some motions are made to exclude evidence. Some motions are made to include evidence. Some motions are made to bring in certain expert witnesses, things like that.
Yeah.
So that whole process is quite a bit. It takes quite a while. And then the trial itself usually takes, I would say, 2 to 3 months at least. And the jury selection process, although it's changed a bit now, but back when I was doing it, the jury selection process alone would take about at least a month to choose a jury. They would, you'd have to bring in a panel of, I don't know if you ever sat on a jury, but usually there's about maybe 50 or 60 on a jury panel for a regular case. On a death penalty case, they would bring in 300 or 400 potential jurors.
Oh my God.
And then you'd have to go through what they call qualifying them.
Yes.
Death qualifying is what it's called.
Yeah.
To determine whether or not they could be fair and impartial in a death penalty case. Some people are absolutely opposed to the death penalty under all circumstances. Some people are adamantly in favor of the death penalty under certain circumstances. So those kinds of biases and prejudices need to come out and make a determination whether or not they would be fair enough to sit on the jury.
You had a case about the guy that went on a killing spree.
Oh yeah, well that was my first death penalty case.
Really?
Yeah, he started in San Jose, California. He escaped from county jail. I forget what the charge was that he was in the county jail for, but he escaped from the county jail. And he wound up in St. Louis, Missouri, which was his home originally. And he and a friend hired a cab, and they shot and killed the cab driver for the purpose of robbery. And then they drove to Kansas City, Missouri, and went to Denny's restaurant. And they were out in the parking lot, and there was this businessman getting into his car, and they kidnapped him at gunpoint and put him in the trunk of his car and then drove. And somewhere between Kansas City, Missouri and Blythe, California, they had killed him and dumped his body. They think it was around New Mexico somewhere. But anyway, they got into California, and there was a woman on the side of the road out in Blythe, California, changing a flat tire, and they pulled up behind her and they kidnapped her, and they wound up killing her. And then they drove from there, they drove to just outside Barstow, and they pulled into a gas station to get gas, and there was a woman attendant, and they kidnapped her at gunpoint and took her to a vacant house out there and raped her and killed her.
Oh my God.
And then from there they drove to back to San Jose, California, and they were finally stopped and arrested in San Jose. So my particular client was charged with a death penalty murder in St. Louis, a death penalty murder in Riverside County, and a death penalty murder in San Bernardino County. I represented him on the San Bernardino County case.
Did you go to the jail to talk to him?
Absolutely, yeah.
Is that
Quite a
what
number
you
of
do as
Yeah.
part of your job, to go to jail and talk to those people?
Yeah, I remember the first time I met him was out in Indio, Riverside County Jail out in Indio. And I actually took my wife with me.
Yeah.
And we were going to spend a couple of days out in Palm Springs after the interview. So we went to the Indio jail and asked to see him. And we were put in this, four-walled room with no windows and a table and 3 chairs. And he came in shackles, and he sat down in the chair, and we introduced ourselves, and I talked to him. And we must have talked for about an hour, I guess, and we left. And my first thing my wife said was that, I can't believe that that individual committed those kinds of crimes. He was such a gentleman. He was such an easy-spoken, quiet individual. So, but it was an interesting experience.
Then you had another case about this woman that was in a hotel, and the guy saw that she's easy.
That was my first
target.
murder case, actually.
Really?
Yeah, he was coming from Colorado and New Mexico. He had served time in Colorado for a burglary and a robbery, and he wound up in a truck stop in Pico Rivera, California.
Oh, yeah.
And he was in the luncheonette at the truck stop, and he saw this elderly woman. She was about 75, 76 years old, having something to eat. And he watched her, and she got up and she left. And she was staying in this motel.
He followed her?
Right next to the truck stop.
Oh.
So he watched what room she went in, and he waited a while. And then after a while, he climbed in through the window, because the window was a little open. And he started to go through her property, and she was already in bed, and she was sleeping. And he made some noise, and she woke up. So he pulled the electrical cord off the lamp that was sitting on the table, and he wrapped it around her neck, and he strangled her. And then he wrapped her up in the bedspread, put her in her car, and took her car, and drove from there to Billings, Montana. And what he did was he used her credit card to buy gas. So there was this trail of gas credit cards and gas stations where he stopped and bought gas, and so they just followed him right to Billings, Montana. He was arrested there. Yeah, he was my first murder client. He's still doing time.
He's still in jail?
Yeah, he got 25 years to life. He got life in prison.
What about the other guy that killed all those people?
The other guy, like I said, he had a death penalty in San Bernardino County, he had a death penalty in Riverside County, and a death penalty in St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, Missouri got a hold of him, and they wouldn't let him go until they tried him, convicted him, and then they executed him.
Wow.
So we never got him back here to, do a trial.
So you couldn't defend him?
Right.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
What about the 3-strike law? How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it was harsh, when it was originally passed, because what it was is that if you got a third felony after 2 serious violent felonies, like say robbery and burglary, and then you got a third felony, right? It didn't have to be serious or violent, and you would get life in prison if you got convicted of that third felony. Well, I had a case, as a matter of fact, that my client was, his first and second felony convictions were, one was attempted murder and the other one was robbery. And the third one, he had walked into a 7-Eleven store, walked over to the refrigerator where they keep the beer, pulled out a 6-pack of beer and just walked out of the store. And the clerk ran after him and grabbed the 6-pack and told him that if you want it, you got to pay for it. So he goes back in, and he goes back to the refrigerator and gets a quart bottle of beer and opens it up and starts drinking it and walks out. So the clerk calls the police, and the police come and they arrest him. And they arrest him for petty theft, taking property that's worth less than $500 at the time. Well, petty theft is a misdemeanor. But if you have a serious or a felony that you've served prison time on, they can enhance that misdemeanor to make it a felony, which the DA did in that case. And so he was tried for a 3rd strike life sentence on basically a petty theft for stealing a bottle of beer. He was convicted, and I found out that from the abstracted judgment on some of the other cases is that he never actually served time on the felony that they used to enhance the misdemeanor to a felony.
Really?
So it was no good.
Wow.
So I made the argument to the judge and he denied it. He sentenced him to life in prison, and then the case went up on appeal and the appellate court overturned his conviction. And he got a misdemeanor sentence and he was immediately released from prison because he had served more than, petty theft is like the maximum is 6 months in county jail. By then he had been in jail for probably about 1.5 years or so.
Ah.
Yeah. So, but today, to just add a little to, they've changed it. The law has changed to where it has to be serious violent felony for that third felony to be 3 strikes.
That's
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, it's
than
actually
just,
better. Yeah.
Did you ever have a case, a DUI case?
Many DUI cases, yeah.
Do they take a long time?
They don't normally take as long as murder cases. You know, they may take maybe 6 months to 1 year before they get resolved. You know, not all of them go to trial. Most of them, in fact, don't go to trial.
Why would they go to trial? Why would, unless they killed somebody?
No, I mean, they would go to trial because a lot of reasons. Because, you know, maybe there was they didn't do it. I mean, maybe they were. I mean, there was a lot of defenses. They weren't the driver. They weren't under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time. I mean, there was a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why they would go to trial on a DUI. Yeah. So, and yeah, I've handled quite a number of those, and like I say, most of them don't go to trial. The ones that do go to trial, they're usually a situation where there's a reasonably good defense. You know, maybe the chemical test analysis was bad, and so they can't prove that he was driving with a .08 or more blood alcohol or something like that. And so they'll contest it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So some cases with the DUI, how much does it cost per person to get a DUI? I mean, it's a lot of money, huh?
Yeah, well, excluding attorney's fees, I mean, it's going to cost you, if you get convicted of a DUI, it's going to cost you probably about $1,200 in fines.
Yeah.
It's going to have an impact on your insurance.
Yeah.
You know, and so I would say, on the average, a first-time DUI is going to run the individual probably at least $10,000.
Really?
Yeah.
And then the second time, it's going to be...
Second time's more significant because now you're facing jail time for a second offense. So it's going to be more expensive. And then because it becomes more serious and you're facing more significant punishment, then the alternative of going to trial becomes a little more advantageous because in essence, if you just plead to the DUI, you wind up getting thrown in jail or something like that. So you try to avoid it. Well, you take it to trial and see what happens. You know, and people do that quite a bit.
Wow.
And after the third or fourth one, they could charge it as a felony. You know,
Really?
and then you can do state prison time. You know.
For how long? A long time in prison?
I think it's 16 months, 2 or 3 years for each felony.
For a DUI?
Yeah,
Okay.
16 months, 2 or 3 years in state prison
Wow.
for a DUI felony.
Best thing is not
Yeah.
to drink
Yeah.
and drive, not to drink and drive.
Don't drink and drive. Now, remember in California, it's interesting, California, it's not against the law to drink and drive.
Really?
Yeah, it's against the law to drink and have in your system a .08 or more blood alcohol level
Oh, but if it's
at the
slow.
time you're driving.
Oh.
Right. So,
Wow.
but to drink and drive is not really against the law.
Oh, you just have to be low in the low. not
In
too-
fact,
too high.
when we ask questions of the potential jurors, we ask them, did you ever drink and drive? You know,
Oh, so they can relate to that, huh?
so they could relate to it. You know. Yeah.
Well, it was so nice having you here. We got so much information.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for asking me.
Thank you for watching, and next time we'll have another interesting person. Thank you. Bye.